Welcome to The Big Picture, a show that takes a deep dive into the political landscape of not only America, but right here in our own backyard of Illinois.
It's showtime, folks.
The Big Picture is on WCPT 820. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath.
Hello, everybody. Happy Saturday. It is another lovely day here in the upper Midwest. And a time, I think, of reflection. So I'm going to be a little more somber than usual here for the next few minutes because rage and retribution, boy, nothing good comes from there. And of course, I am thinking about many things, but top of mind right now is that after so much death, so much destruction, and such deep sadness, all sides agree that a ceasefire in Gaza begins in just a few hours. It will be months before all the hostages are returned, years before the rubble is removed and Gaza is rebuilt, and trust and the scars of living, they don't ever end. The Israelis won major strategic victories, weakening Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and their common founder and funder, Iran. The people of Gaza, they won nothing. The larger Palestinian cause won only in the sense that Israel's moral high ground was eroded in the eyes of the world. Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader, calculated that a large attack on Israel, a brutal slaughter of innocents and the taking of hostages would draw Israel into war in Gaza and simultaneously bring Israel's enemies on all sides to attack its flanks and finally erase that country from the map. Instead, he's dead. His family is dead. And his calculus turned out to be a political, moral, and humanitarian disaster. The announced ceasefire brought cheers and celebrations amid the ruins in Gaza. In Israel, there were no celebrations. Israelis think they paid too high a cost for their geopolitical gains. They cannot feel at peace while hostages are still captive. Their society is divided about the conduct of the war, and their prime minister, Mr. Netanyahu, has been charged with war crimes. All of that. Now the deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia, the deal whose imminent signing, after all, spurred the timing of this attack on October 7th, it'll be resurrected. Life will go on. So much death, so much misery, so much suffering, and for nothing. Nothing. If we could just set aside anger and hate and embrace instead our common humanity, oh my gosh, how much could we accomplish? And that's a question America itself will not soon answer as we are embarking on our own campaign of retribution. As you know, Tuesday, Donald Trump is going to be sworn in. He promises, of course, immediately to launch massive roundups and deportations in cities like mine, Chicago. Because of the cold, Mr. Trump has chosen to be sworn in inside the Capitol rather than on the steps. Imagine that. 4 years ago, he sent armed insurrectionists to that very spot to try to overthrow an election he lost. Now, 4 years later, he will triumph there. That is a huge celebration for him and a very bitter pill for a lot of us. At his side will be America's new oligarchs, the super wealthy men who control so much of the media. Take Mark Zuckerberg, the owner of Meta, whose disinformation platform was so important to the organization of the January 6th attack. And now he says truth is too costly a goal. So he got rid of all the fact checkers. He got rid of the apps and the algorithms that looked for lies. Far more profitable to freely traffic in them. And of course, he's following a model engineered by a great engineer, Elon Musk, whose platform algorithms effectively buried truth under a mountain of lies during his past campaign. And Jeff Bezos, who once said democracy dies in darkness, but he'll be there too, showing us how it dies in the light of day. And, there will be foreign leaders for the first time at our inauguration. I mean, we used to think they were sort of American affairs about us and for us, but Trump has invited a few here, including, the leader of the German far-right party, a party so radically to the right that the German government thinks it's an extremist group. Look, the oligarchs and the neo-Nazis are there to send a message to the rest of us. Power is what matters, and we must submit or face the consequences. Well, look, here's what I want to tell you. That is, of course, just another big lie. Their big strategic decision about how they're going to push us around, how they're going to conquer us, it's as much a folly as Yahya Sinwar's dream was. Look, ideas matter. Love matters. The social bonds built together over generations matter. Our aspirations for a prosperous, free, and united country matter. Power is a means, not an end. And those who think it is an end, they only deliver darkness and misery. I know I will not submit. I will not pretend this is who we are. And you should not either. But I want to remind you where we are. And it's worth taking the time. So get settled and maybe even take some notes. This is important stuff because I want to talk to you about the Trump playbook. It does not flow from our history, but rather is the one written by Hungary's Viktor Orban, the man who destroyed that nation's young democracy. And that's no secret. Trump has said so. He's long admired the man. He said he wants to follow his model. And of course, what passes for the intelligentsia of America's right wing spent years eagerly studying his career with hopes to copy his rise and then his grasp on power. CPAC now meets there. Isn't it so fun? I can barely remember his name. Tucker Carlson. It has long made Hungary his model, but they're not alone. I've studied it too, as have others. And I want to share with you what I've learned and what others have learned because it's good for our own defense. And here I'm going to rely on the work of two scholars, Veronica Angel of Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and Eric Jones of the Robert Schuman Center for Advanced Studies at the European University Institute. Last April, they published a study in the Journal of Democracy, and it examined the collapse of Hungarian democracy. And they described it as a form of state capture, but they identified the 4 phases he went through to do it. So let's just take a little bit of time and understand those phases and then how they apply to us. First, Orban had to take over a major political party. He did. Fidesz, which is the name of that party, now answers only to him in Hungary. Next, he had to neutralize watchdogs and controls. He did. He succeeded in corrupting legislative oversight, so that didn't matter. Then he got his wealthy supporters either to purchase the media or to intimidate it, so the watchdogs were cowed. Then he secured control over state resources and institutions, and he did this by getting elected and then installing obedient partisans throughout the government. Folks who put his interests ahead of the government's, ahead of their democracies. And finally, with that power, he rewrote the rules. They changed their constitution to entrench their regime. Now, if that doesn't sound completely familiar, let me spend a few moments and Americanize it for you. Ready? Donald Trump gained control of the GOP. He expelled anyone in the party that didn't fall in line. Mitt Romney, gone. Liz Cheney, gone. Before that, even in his first term, he was taken after John McCain. They didn't fall in line, they're gone. Rhinos. Sets the whole MAGA apparatus up against them. There's now one left in the party, no one who will even question his decisions. And if you doubt that, think of Joni Ernst. It's been widely reported that Senator Ernst, senator from Iowa, knows Pete Hegseth is unfit to lead the Defense Department. Ernst is a former soldier. She's worked hard on issues like sexual harassment in the military. And, we've been reliably told she's disgusted by Hegseth's antipathy to women. Yet after a campaign that included attack ads back in Iowa, threats, she's going to follow orders and not vote her conscience or her judgment. But she's going to vote as Mr. Trump requires. The Republican Party captured, hook, line, and sinker. Run by his stepdaughter, after all. Next, there was this question of what do you do about the oversight and the watchdogs? Well, Mr. Trump surely doesn't worry about legislative oversight. Speaker Johnson has said that's not important. Impeachment no longer matters. On his orders, Johnson even kicked out the Republican chairman of the House Intelligence Committee because he kind of took that job seriously. And of course, the Supreme Court has said there are no laws that can constrain him. He is not criminally liable for anything he does as president. He is above the law, at least as far as John Roberts and his court are concerned. And okay, that's the government. No constraints there. The media, well, it's been overmatched, right? His allies, Musk, Zuckerberg, and Bezos, own the biggest slice of the media. Our country's largest cable network, Fox, that's an arm of the GOP. His nominee for FBI director isn't really satisfied with that. He says he wants to sue any news organizations that are still critics out there of the administration. Silence it all. That's 2. Remember, there were 4. 3 was gain control over state resources. And look, Trump is already moving to fill his cabinet with lackeys who clearly put Trump over our Constitution and our democracy. For gosh sakes, Pam Bondi, who's supposed to be the Attorney General, the woman who would be responsible for the enforcement of law in the federal government, says about the 14th Amendment, I don't know, I got to look at it. Maybe it says what Trump says. The guy in charge he put up for Secretary of Defense says if there's an illegal order, say to invade Greenland, he isn't going to tell us that he will disobey that illegal order. Of course he won't. Dangerous times. And then there's the part about changing the rules to entrench power. Well, for that, we've already done a lot of that. And you can thank John Roberts for that, because he spent most of the last decade legalizing gerrymanders, eroding voting rights, and abusing his power to hear cases in order to entrench GOP rule. It's a real problem in our states, and they want to make it in the federal government. Do not be surprised when they renew calls for a constitutional convention to rewrite the way our government works. This is the reality we face as Mr. Trump walks under that sacred dome and swears an oath that he doesn't believe in. This is where we are. But look, unlike the Hungarians, and despite the creeping authoritarianism in America, we have not yet lost our democracy. In fact, we have proven time and again that we will fight to keep it. And I think this is one of those times. I think we were on autopilot for a while when this creeping authoritarianism happened. I think we're awake now, and I think we will fight. Americans elected Mr. Trump, no question about it. No whining, no lying about that from our side, because we believe that over time, we are all better when our leaders are chosen by the people. And look, we don't fear when we lose, because in America, there are other elections coming, and there are constraints on power. both checks and balances built into the system and strict limitations on the powers themselves. Yeah, I know they've been weakened a little bit, but we're going to pay attention. We know what game we're in, and we are going to fight to strengthen them wherever we can. And look, there's some other things. I mean, instead of spending their time trying to get more power, Mr. Trump and his gang should spend time doing the things we need done. And this time we're going to hold them to it, right? We want to fix our border problem. We want more housing and lower prices. We want better schools and cheaper drugs. We want an end to wildfires and 100-year floods that come every year. We want insurance to say yes when we file a claim. And we want cheaters to be caught and hard work to pay off. And I hope Trump succeeds in these endeavors, because that's what we elected him to do. And I hope he tries. But look, unlike 2016, Mr. Trump does not get the benefit of the doubt. He doesn't. We'll hold him to account. We will talk about these things every day. We will say, you promised, you have to deliver. No, sir, you promised, you have to deliver. I don't care about whatever you're saying. This is what you promised. You have to deliver. And you know what? They aren't going to get to just focus on their own power. We won't let them. And one of the reasons we won't let him is we don't care what he says anymore. Who cares what he says? We know what he says are all lies. So instead, we're going to pay attention to what he does and what the consequences are. We'll see, right? We'll see. He says they're going to raid Chicago this week. They're going to round up millions. I doubt it. I don't think they have the capacity to do it. You know, in my mind, there's going to be a sound truck running around like there was in the movie Casablanca saying resistance is futile. You know, we're here, we're in charge. And, you know, nonsense. I don't think he's going to do it. We'll pay attention, though, to what he does. And if lives get better, bravo. And if they don't, guess what? They got no one else to blame. Jim Jordan can't go hold hearings and blame, I don't know, me, you, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden. Nope, they own it. They own all of it. All of it. And here's the other thing. The American people quite literally saved Donald Trump from prison and ruin. We have a lot to expect in return for that favor. But if past is prologue, my friends, I think the only thing we should expect is betrayal. But this time, you and I and the rest of our fellow Americans, we are not helpless. And we must not be fearful. My friends, we are ready for what's coming. I, for one, welcome it. This waiting around and listening to their blather, listening to try and make us afraid, that's been terrible. Let's get on with it. Show us what you got. Show us what you're really going to do, and we will let you know whether it's okay or not. That's where I am. Thank you for sticking with me. I know this was a little longer than usual. I have a fabulous show for you today. Great journalists and some of our oldest friends coming. So we're going to take a break. And when we come back, I think we're going to go right to a fabulous reporter, Doug Bach-Clark from ProPublica. Stay tuned.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Clark covers so much. Threats to democracy and abuses to power in America's South for ProPublica. But, you know, he's also just really interesting. He's an author. He's a documentary film producer. His first book was called The Last Whalers, 3 years in the far Pacific with a courageous tribe and a vanishing way of life. That found him literally in the middle of nowhere, chasing sperm whales with a bamboo harpoon. And, you know, like, I love Moby Dick. I think it's like the greatest book ever. So I was thrilled to see that. And then there was Assassins, a documentary he produced based on his reporting on the assassination of the brother of Kim Jong-un. So this is a very interesting guy that I think you should know. Doug, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Hey, you know, we're moments away from inaugurating President Trump, and that has all kinds of implications for the things that you cover for ProPublica, and I want to talk about that. But given just how interesting and varied your interests have been, how did you find your way to ProPublica and this particular area of coverage?
So I spent the beginning of my career overseas. I was essentially a foreign correspondent for American magazines, and I specialized at certain points in North Korea. Especially, I spent a lot of time in the country of Indonesia, living, as you noted, with a hunter-gatherer tribe, and writing about how they were grappling with the encroachment of modernity and globalization on their remote island. And, after give or take a decade of doing that, I really wanted to come home and try and tell stories that would matter to a place that I saw had been rapidly changing while I was away. I would go and do these stories, and then I would come back to the States, and it seemed to me that the United States was really shifting, especially around the 2016 to 2020 period during the first Trump administration. And so I wanted to come and write about things closer to home, and that is how I ended up at ProPublica.
That's really interesting. And you ended up with your beat is the South, which is also fascinating in this particular time.
Well, the South is, in many ways, sort of the battle lines of a lot of the ideological and political struggles that are getting fought right now. A place like North Carolina, which we'll talk about more today, is really very much is one of the few truly purple states that's left. And so a lot of the issues and agendas that are being pushed out of places like Washington, D.C. are really actually being fought at the granular state level in North Carolina or in Georgia, especially having to do with elections and democracy. And it's been such a gift after, spending so much time overseas where I would be everywhere. The whole world was my reporting field, to really get to dive into a place that I think of as my home and to try and make a difference there.
Yeah, well, and your reporting has. So let's turn to North Carolina. The context for me, for North Carolina, isn't actually North Carolina. It's Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter, and he's been on my mind since he passed recently, said, you know what, there's a new South, and it's a different South, and it is forward-looking. It's one where people of different races know each other and can move past the tragedy of American history together. And that's sort of one view of America's South, that it is a new and interesting place. And then there's, of course, the retrenchment that says, yeah, no, we didn't mean that. We're still the South of, Lester Maddox, and we're never going to get along. And in North Carolina, you have this effort to create a new South and this retrenchment, and it's just brutally being fought right now. So talk a little bit about the state, and then let's talk about what's going on with that Supreme Court race.
Well, yeah, as you note, there's these competing visions of the South that are really being enacted in North Carolina. North Carolina is a state that is split pretty much 50-50 in the general electorate between Republicans and Democrats. It's very close. It's elected a Democratic governor for the last 3 cycles at this point now, so 12 years of having a Democratic governor. But its congressional delegation, helped along by gerrymandering, is pretty heavily Republican. Its state house, also helped along by gerrymandering, is very heavily Republican. And so it's a state where even though the electorate is 50-50, efforts to tilt or sort of control elections really make a big difference in terms of how the state is run and what representation the state sends to Congress.
Yeah, we have familiarity a little bit with that in this part of the country because Wisconsin has a shared phenomena of a minority power, or and in their case it is that in the state legislative races. I think this may be true in North Carolina too. Democrats generally get more votes than Republicans, even though they end up with far fewer seats because of the map making. So you end up with this phenomena of a minority power taking control of government and imposing its will on people, and that is reminiscent of pre-Civil War stuff. It's very frightening.
Well, I think, Wisconsin is a good way for your listeners in the Midwest to conceptualize North Carolina. It's a place where the margins are razor thin, where the red wave in 2010 ushered in a Republican supermajority in the legislature that, subsequently gerrymandered and changed election law in ways that have continued to benefit it to this day. And that's one of the reasons that there's such a tightly, bitterly contested election outcome down here in North Carolina right now.
Yeah, let's talk about that because really, you would think first off, Americans now think of courts, Supreme Courts, whether it's in the states or the one in D.C. They think that they are legislative functions, not dissimilar to an actual legislation. Oh, that's just the Democrats are going to do this when they have the court. The Republicans are going to do that when they have the court. But that is, of course, not what the founders or anybody who studied jurisprudence thinks the judicial system is about. It's been politicized and not really over the social issues we fight so much about in America, because there is some common ground even on those. But really, it's over gerrymandering, because now maps are decided by state Supreme Courts.
Yes, so a lot of Democratic advocates and the Democratic Party in North Carolina have put a lot of effort into this Supreme Court race, because if the Democratic Party here wants to have any chance of undoing the gerrymandering of the state legislative seats and the federal congressional seats, then they really need to win back control of the North Carolina Supreme Court. Right now, it's divided at 5 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And in the election that just happened last November in 2024, a Republican judge lost to the Democratic incumbent by roughly 700 votes. So an incredibly minuscule margin, 700 out of roughly 5 million. And now that Republican judge is really pulling out all the stops to try and overturn the result of that election, and is really taking quite a few measures that historically have not been taken before.
Well, let's talk about those. Talk about the ones that have already happened, where that small victory was affirmed, and then talk about where we stand today.
So, this is a long and convoluted legal saga, but I'm going to back up to the beginning. And the first thing I'll do is I'll just introduce you to the players involved. So there's Allison Riggs, who is the Democratic justice. She was the incumbent. She was on the Supreme Court before. And then you have the Republican judge, who is a member of the Court of Appeals, which is the intermediary appeals court in North Carolina, who was challenging her. And they had an extremely close race. And on election night, Judge Griffin, the Republican, appeared to be, give or take, 10,000 votes ahead of Justice Allison Riggs. However, because of changes to voting rights laws and the generally contested nature of elections in North Carolina has a very large number of provisional ballots that are not fully adjudicated on election night. And we're talking tens upon tens of thousands of them. So people have a window of about a week and a half to go in, and if there's been a problem with their ballot, like if say you forgot to bring your driver's license or your voter ID to the polls with you. You're allowed to cast a provisional ballot, and you can come back and you can show that, here's my actual voter ID. Here is my proof that I'm allowed to vote at a later, during that week afterwards, and have that ballot count. So so many voters did this, and when all of the provisional ballot hearing was done, when all of the sort of adjudicating of these ballots that were paused was done, Allison Riggs ended up about 700 votes ahead. So that really caught the Republican establishment here off guard. That really caught the Judge Griffin off guard, and they didn't have a lot of recourse. Instead, that was the sort of the final vote count. So the next step in sort of contesting that was they could go to what's called the State Board of Elections, and each state has a state agency or board or other entity which runs the elections there. And in North Carolina, that board is the first step if you want to contest an election. So Judge Griffin and his allies went to the state board and they said, we think that there should be, give or take, 60,000 votes that were counted that should not be counted. We think that that these votes were illegitimate and you should toss them out, and that the victory should be awarded to Judge Griffin. The State Board of Elections pointed out, as a federal judge had already done so, that many of these complaints that Griffin was bringing didn't have a strong foundation. So the vast majority of these complaints were based around the fact that, give or take, 60,000 voters did not have their driver's license or Social Security information entered into the state database. Now, there are many, many valid reasons that people might not have that information entered into the database, including that it was not required by the state's voter registration forms to be given up until a year before the election. So many, many tens of thousands of people, if not more, had registered without providing this information.
Because they registered earlier, right?
Yeah,
you don't have to register every year. Yeah.
Yeah, they registered before the update was made to that form. There are many, many other reasons that the state election board has shown that these things might be missing, from data entry errors to there's trouble syncing between the software systems and the DMV and the state election board. This was not a nefarious thing. Judge Griffin failed to provide a single example out of those 60,000 votes of anyone who voted illegally, who wasn't following the rules at the time that they registered and voted. And I really want to emphasize that again. None of these votes, there's been no proven example of like illegal voting or voter fraud or anything untoward. This is just the argument is essentially from the Republicans is that this information is missing. So it's possible in a very small sort of, unlikely way that there could have been voter fraud, but we can't actually prove any. Still, just, the fact that this information is missing means that your vote shouldn't count. It's really quite a striking argument, and it's one that they actually made before the election when the Republican National Committee had challenged many of these voters, and a Trump-appointed federal judge had thrown that, or had stopped that from happening. So we now have the state election board reconsidering things that a federal judge and it itself had already said, these aren't valid reasons for discounting people's votes. And last December, it again decided that Judge Griffin's challenges were not legitimate and moved to start certifying the election. That is quite a long explanation.
That's good, but the background is really clear. So Doug, she wins by the law that's in place at the time of the election, and the law that's in place at the time of the election, even according to a Trump-appointed federal judge, was that people are allowed to cure. If somebody says, hey, you need to bring in your ID, there's a grace window, they're allowed to bring in their ID. That's the law of the land when they held the election. And after recounts, it's clear she won. That's where we've gotten to in the story, right?
Correct. So the state election board has said, all right, we have heard your challenges, Judge Griffin. We do not think these are valid, and we are going to move forward and certify this election. In response to that, Judge Griffin and his allies file what is called a writ of prohibition to the North Carolina Supreme Court, seeking the North Carolina Supreme Court to stop the certification of Justice Riggs' election victory. This is pretty extraordinary for a number of reasons. One, historically, North Carolina has had a lot of closely contested elections. In fact, in 2020, a Democratic justice lost to a Republican justice by only 401 votes. But once things get to the state election board, once the state election board sort of, does its process, checks everything, and issues its decisions, people have not tried to go around it and beyond it. And the Democratic justice in 2020 just accepted it, didn't go to litigation, that was over. However, in this case, the Republican judge decides, okay, state election board, we're not going to accept your ruling. But even more, according to how state election rules on litigation normally work, you would go to a lower level superior court in North Carolina, which is sort of the lowest level. The Republican judge skips this steps. He doesn't file a normal lawsuit. He files this thing, which, again, an unusual writ of prohibition, which he sends directly to the North Carolina Supreme Court. And the North Carolina Supreme Court is 5-2 Republican. Even more, as I myself and ProPublica have reported, many of these judges have close ties to the Republican candidate, Judge Jefferson Griffin. So the majority of them, of their families, have donated money to Griffin's current or past campaigns. The Chief Justice of the Republicans of the Supreme Court is a Republican named Paul Newby, who Griffin has called his mentor. He's talked about what close friends they are and the closeness of their relationship. So essentially what Griffin has done here is he's skipped the normal channels for processing an election litigation contest like this and gone straight to people who are his political allies and who, he himself claims are his friends rather than going through normal channels.
So, Doug, of course, the appropriate thing for a Supreme Court then to do is say, no, we can't take this case. It's not ripe for our jurisdiction at this point. So in a normal circumstance, they would just say that, go to the lower court if you want to do it. That's your right. But we're not hearing this case now. That's not what happened.
No. So a flurry. So after Judge Griffin went to the North Carolina Supreme Court, a whole flurry of litigation has erupted. The Allison Griffin and the state election board have tried to file to get this heard in federal court. Again, a federal judge pre-election had heard this issue, the issue about the validity of these 60,000 voters, and had, issued orders and rulings on it. However, and so they thought it would be appropriate for the federal courts to handle it. This is also the requirement that people have this identifying information is also part of a federal law, which makes it even more appropriate for the federal court to hear it, according to Justice Riggs' lawyers. And so they wanted it heard in federal court. Judge Griffin's lawyers have really fought hard for it to be heard in front of the state court. And then just a few weeks ago, I think many people were surprised when the Trump-appointed federal judge decided to send this back to the state Supreme Court and say, I think this is a state matter, and you, North Carolina Supreme Court, will now may potentially get to choose whether you want your political ally or your political opponent to be a member of your court.
So that one way of phrasing the decision in front of them. The other is, will you get to decide whether voting laws are going to be upheld or are they not going to be upheld? It's a, I guess it's a different frame, one that as a citizen in a nation that supposedly is governed by the rule of law, and I think we are. That should matter. I wasn't surprised that the federal government, that the federal judiciary didn't hear the case, Doug, because the Supreme Court has been antithetical to voting rights cases of all kinds and has basically shut the federal judiciary's doors to protecting voters under John Roberts. So here we are in front of your Supreme Court, and they're going to hear this when?
So, to make things even more complicated, there are now two tracks that this case is proceeding on, one of which is in front of the North Carolina Supreme Court. I should say issue rather than case, because there are actually multiple cases about this. This issue is now proceeding on. One of which is in front of the North Carolina Supreme Court, and there have been a number of briefings on this between the different parties, and the briefings will continue through next week, after which I expect we'll know more about next steps in the North Carolina Supreme Court. At the same time, the state board and the Riggs campaign have appealed to the federal circuit of appeals, and they are hearing oral arguments about this issue in 2 weeks. And so we have two sort of parallel tracks of litigation, two competing, very high-level bodies trying to make decisions about this. But ultimately, on either track, the decisions could end up with the highest state court or the highest federal court, which have a strong majority of Republicans, and that's something that advocates have raised worries over.
So here we are, but yet even if this Democratic justice wins re-election, the Republican court is 5-2 majority. So how is it that they are going to war now over this? Being willing to toss out the will of the voters, being willing to be seen as overturning an election, even though they've already got a majority. And I'm guessing the answer to that is there's yet another judicial election before the next redistricting, and it's all about remapping and guaranteeing a majority for the next remap.
So I'm not a mind reader. I can't say exactly why the Republican justices are sort of doing what they have. One of those justices has issued a very strong dissent against taking up this case. Extremely strong language saying that we shouldn't be doing this. This is opening up a whole. This is not how voting rights law works. Essentially, is what he's saying, but. The other four Republican justices, took this up, and why they did so, we'll see as, oral arguments and the legal process goes on. However, a lot of experts and a lot of voting rights advocates really do feel that this is a battle that comes down to gerrymandering. For the Democratic for the Democrats to get a representation equal to the population, their population in North Carolina, they really need to do the gerrymander here. And the only way to do that, given that the playing field is tilted so heavily against them, is probably through legal rulings. And the next time
happened in Wisconsin. Yep. So they got to take back the court. Okay, I think we have we've like 4.5 minutes left. So let's just take a quick look at a couple other issues in the South. Is it really true that there were ads telling voting officials they didn't have to certify the vote if it didn't come out their way?
Yes. So strongly suggesting that. So one of the things that I reported on ahead of the 2024 election was efforts by right-wing groups to prepare to contest a Trump loss. And a lot of the groups that I was looking at, a lot of these activists, especially those from the Election Integrity Network, which is a group led by a woman who helped Trump try to overturn the 2020 election, were trying to change voting laws and voting rules in such a way that a conservative or a Republican election board member would not have to necessarily certify a Trump loss. And, we found numerous examples of them doing actions behind the scenes to both sort of spread this argument that they wouldn't potentially have to certify an unfavorable result, but also change the rules, like in Georgia, to allow the election board members to do so.
So we have a really interesting dilemma, and I'm so glad you're spending your time reporting on it. We have a party that's been captured, the GOP, by factions that do not believe in democracy and are aggressively using the tools of a democracy to try and defeat the idea that people are sovereign. You see it in the Supreme Court fight here where someone lost the vote, and they're thinking of saying, yeah, it doesn't matter. And your reporting on pre-2024 was they're getting ready to say if Trump didn't win, it doesn't count again, like they did 4 years ago. And now we're swearing the guy in a couple of days. You're going to have an enormous and important portfolio, Doug, of things to cover in the next 4 years.
Well, I think a lot of the battles, especially in the South, but nationwide, in the democracy space right now revolve around voting rights, revolve around whether or not, those rules should stay the same or be changed, and who gets advantage by their transformation. So I would not be surprised if in 2025 and onward, we continue to see these battles between Republicans and Democrats over how Americans should vote and whose votes should count.
Yeah, and who gets to count them. Yep. I think we have a minute. I'm going to change subject again, because this battle over democracy, if at least you look at the examples in Hungary and other places, is about voting rights, but it's about something else too. It's also about taking on other sources of truth, really, in a society, and that means going after journalists. What's going on at ProPublica to protect what you guys do against the kind of sort of aggressive litigation that Akash Patel promises to bring your way?
The best protection that any journalist can ever have is just telling the truth and being accurate and being fair and making sure to get the both sides of the argument and to hear out both sides. And the truth is the strongest shield to libel law. So we, as always, both before and after this presidential transition, will be doing everything possible to make sure our reporting is accurate and fair.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's not just both sides, because if I say it's sunny and you say it's raining, a journalist can say, he said it's sunny, he said it's raining, but the third step is to actually go outside and look to see what the weather is. And really good journalism doesn't just give both sides, it seeks the truth. And I agree with you, that's an enormously great calling, one that you've been involved in all over the world, and I'm glad you're back home doing this work now. Doug, I really appreciate your time and the deep dive we just took into what's going on in the Supreme Court race in North Carolina. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Mark Folman is the national affairs editor at the very important news organization Mother Jones. He has, in the tradition of Mother Jones, been fearless in his reporting, including some very complicated and hard to cover issues around guns in America. And the tenor of all of their reporting is really fabulous and brave and important. So I urge you all to get to know Mother Jones. Mark, welcome back.
Thanks, Edwin. Good to be here again.
Well, in a few days, a new era in American history will begin. And, that's what Donald Trump promised. And that's what Kamala Harris warned us about. And it is even what Joe Biden talked about in his farewell address this past week. So there's lots of agreement that things are going to be different going forward. What's this era going to be like?
Well, I think, there are a lot of high expectations and anxieties around it. What may be coming, honestly, I think it's a little difficult to say. I mean, we know some difficult things are coming, to be sure. Policies that have been, highlighted by Trump and his campaign last year and coming into the inauguration period now. We've seen the nominees he's picked for his cabinet positions who are now going through confirmation hearings, some really pretty radical choices, people who I think quite objectively are not remotely qualified for the roles they're being asked to fulfill, to lead the Pentagon, to lead Homeland Security, and so on, FBI. So there's a lot to be concerned about. But I think that said, one thing that we should remember is that going through the experience of having Donald Trump as president was in many ways unpredictable. And a lot of things that he claimed he would do, he never did. Other things he did were sloppy or incompetent. There were certainly plenty of things he did that I think were outrageous and caused people grave concern and did real harm. But it's hard to know really what that will look like in the months and years ahead. I think, certainly we're going to see some very intense activity around the immigration and border security issue. It's clear that they're ramping up for that. I think also Trump wants to get the tax cuts to continue, and probably that's the first big effort that will happen in the Congress that he now controls. But in terms of sort of the longer view picture of what this next 4 years will be like, I think pretty much anything is possible.
Yeah. My big worry is, of course, the integrity and resilience of the democracy itself. And you said that Trump is going to do some of the things that he sort of talked about on the campaign trail. I think he's going to do the things he ran away from on the campaign trail, because all the people, all these incompetents you're talking about for big positions are, of course, all vetted by Project 2025 and all of the things in it. And those are very dangerous for our democracy.
Yeah, I think it's fair to expect that they will be more efficient in some ways or more competent in some ways in accomplishing some of the more extreme policy ideas that have been, talked about throughout this period. And, in other words, Trump learned from his mistakes last time. That said, he's mercurial and he, he changes his mind and he gets distracted and his motives sometimes shift. And so, what will they really do to implement these draconian policies that they were campaigning on or trying to run away from, as you say, when they started getting press attention and it was clear that popular opinion was very much against them, remains to be seen. There's certainly plenty of reason to be seriously concerned about what's coming. But I think, in a way, it's almost healthier to look at it as let's see what happens and take it as it comes and respond to it accordingly.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I feel like bring it on. I say that because the anxiety of waiting for him to show up while they say whatever it is they say that we know better than to believe. I'm glad it's over. I'm glad we can start the chapter of let's see what they do and let's not react, but respond accordingly in a thoughtful way so that we can save what we love, protect who we can, and bear witness always. And that just is, I'm glad that's starting. The anticipation has been terrible.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of truth to the concerns about our system of democracy being under threat. No doubt. I mean, he did a lot to try to attack it and corrode it the first time around and promises to do more now. And I think that's a very real danger. But that being said, there are a lot of people in the country who don't agree with the policies and ideas and politics of Donald Trump. And we still have a system that is, in some ways, I think, strong and will, potentially be quite resilient in response to the different things he may attempt to do with government power. So, we'll have to see how that goes. I just think it's worth keeping in mind also that, of course, Trump in a certain sense is very good at creating a phony narrative about his power and success, right? And talking about some kind of massive, unprecedented historical mandate that he supposedly has. Well, that's just simply not true. He won the election, but he won it very narrowly. And I think, if you followed the reporting and the polling throughout the campaign, I think it would be fair to say that he's got a mandate from American voters to bring down the price of eggs and gasoline. People care about the economy. They're very worried about the economy. He's got a mandate to try to fix border security and the broken immigration system, which, by the way, people in our government have been trying to do for many years. And there were solutions on the table last year, bipartisan solution for border security that Trump himself killed for political purposes to help him try to win the campaign. So now he owns that issue, and we'll see what he does with it. But it's on him at this point. Beyond that, he does not have a mandate to do a lot of the really extreme things that were campaign promises that were really based in demagoguery and fear. And I think if he tries to do those things, we'll see a big response to it.
I agree with you. And I think it's important to note he does not have a mandate. He did not an electoral mandate. There was agreement on some issues. He didn't win by very much. My I guess mindset, and it's just only based on the data of 8 years, is if his mouth is open, he's lying. So if he says he has a mandate, he doesn't. I'm not worried about that part. I'm worried about what he does.
Well, he won the election, right? I mean,
he definitely won the election.
He has a mandate
Absolutely.
In that basic sense.
Yep, he won the election.
But in terms of, there is no overwhelming support for these, very extreme policy ideas.
No. And he won the election, and every Democrat said he won the election. And if he lost the election, every Republican would say he won the election because they were planning on that. And I think we need to remember that. Here's what I want to, we've never encountered something quite like this. The power of the U.S. government, the power of the executive branch is strong, and it's stronger now because of the Supreme Court making it unaccountable to anything. And he is now allied to that power. The most powerful tech companies in the world in the information space, among other things, Facebook and Meta and Amazon. And that creates a propaganda power that's unlike anything anyone has ever faced. And, I love the work of Mother Jones, but you don't reach 1 billion people every day. How do we even conceive of the shape of the power that we are confronting?
Well, I think that the danger you're speaking to there, the increasingly kind of oligarchic arrangement that we're seeing take shape in terms of political and economic and media power with the tech moguls that have aligned themselves with Trump. That's something we've reported on vigorously at Mother Jones. And in fact, a year ago, we devoted an entire issue of our magazine, a special issue, to what we call the American oligarchy that was emerging with Musk and Zuckerberg and Trump and others. And so, that's an important area of focus, I think, going forward into the years ahead to scrutinize that relentlessly. And that's what a free and fair press does. That's in a democracy. And Mother Jones and instead of her investigative reporting, we're a part of that. We're not the biggest fish in the ocean, but we work tirelessly at investigative reporting and political reporting, and we like to think that we punch above our weight. And there are others doing great work, independent media, nonprofit media, and some of the mainstream media too, doing terrific reporting. That will continue. And, the press is going to have an important role, I think, to play. I mean, of course, I say that with some bias. It's, my profession. But on the other hand, I think if you look at the kind of longer-term stress test that our system is facing in this era of Donald Trump. In some ways, I think that the fourth estate, the so-called fourth estate, becomes even more vital now as a check on power, because we've seen the diminishment of that with the Congress and with the Supreme Court, with the judiciary. So the role of journalism and independent news reporting that is not fettered by power, not captured by power, is very important.
Very important. That's why when Kash Patel says he's going to sue everybody, it's very frightening. I agree. So we have day one is coming, and on day one, lots of things have been promised. We're told there's 100 executive orders ready to go. We've been told for months and months and months that many of the January 6th insurrectionists will be pardoned on day one. If that happens, what kind of message does that send?
Yeah, well, as you know, this is an area that I've focused on for quite a long time, and I reported on again recently what's at stake here with these pardons, these sweeping pardons that Trump has been promising throughout the campaign, and now in the interim period between his victory and inauguration, saying he will pardon the January 6th offenders en masse. Now, he's always been a little bit ambiguous about that and not really specified what that means in terms of, when we're talking about, roughly 1,600 people who have been prosecuted by the Justice Department, and the biggest criminal investigation in FBI history is still ongoing. I mean, there's still dozens of cases that are open. I reported on this recently in my piece for Mother Jones. There's still, plea deals going on. There's still trials going on. Is Trump planning to shut that all down via his new attorney general, assuming that's Pam Bondi? We don't know. But the question of what he'll do with these pardons is a big one, in my view, and that was the focus of my recent reporting, talking with experts in national security, with some law enforcement sources I have connected with federal law enforcement. Very serious concerns about what that could mean, because really it's, if he pardons all these people who were at the Capitol rioting and breaking into the building and, causing damage and assaulting police officers and all these horrific things that we saw 4 years ago, of course that sends a terrible message to the country in terms of what that event was all about. And it legitimizes that kind of behavior in a certain way, certainly through the narrative that Trump and his allies have been spinning ever since it happened, which is to say, he lied about it. He said, he called it a love fest, right? It was a peaceful protest. And, some of his allies would say, a few people got out of control, but it was mostly like a normal tourist visit. You remember that infamous comment from one of the members of Congress, MAGA members of Congress in support of Trump? Ever since that time, that's been the narrative that Trump and his allies have been trying to cement, to try to whitewash what really happened, to try to cover it up. I think one of the most horrific events in modern American history, certainly one of the most perilous in terms of our system of government, violent insurrection at the Capitol that could have become far, far worse very quickly. I mean, there were people there seeking to ostensibly to murder the vice president and the Speaker of the House. And they were, there were people getting very close to members of Congress in that
really,
environment.
But for the quick thinking of a couple young aides, the box with the electors' votes would have been captured and destroyed. I mean, it's utterly unthinkable what they want, what Donald Trump tried to do to America, and now he's back, and he's thinking of. I mean, no one has said he's thinking of letting guys like Enrique Tarrio out, have they?
I have not seen anything specific on that. And you're talking about the leader of the Proud Boys, who was convicted of seditious conspiracy and is in prison for many years. Also, the leader of the Oath Keepers, Stuart Rhodes, similarly convicted of seditious conspiracy.
Yale Law School graduate. Yeah, go figure. Yeah.
And so, right. I mean, if folks like that were to be allowed out and pardoned for those crimes, it would be very, very serious. I haven't seen anything specific about that, but those two individuals that we're talking about, Tarrio and Rhodes, they did not commit violence at the Capitol. And that's kind of the threshold that has been discussed so far as possibly delineating what Trump will or won't do. It was interesting just last weekend. J.D. Vance was on the Sunday talk shows talking about, well, we may not pardon people who assaulted police officers. And, we'll look at it on a case-by-case basis. So the message was this is more about the people who were there unlawfully on Capitol grounds who maybe didn't leave when they were told to leave and, were convicted of misdemeanor offenses, perhaps going beyond that, too. I mean, those are still crimes, but that's not the same as beating a police officer.
I agree. A lot of people were misled. Hey, is Vance in the loop?
The response to Vance was very interesting. His comments, you had immediately a lot of kind of, hardcore MAGA supporters going after him, blasting him, saying, you can't do that. That's a betrayal. Well, I think that in and of itself is an interesting and telling measure of the seriousness of this issue. What that message will say to pardon all these people, whether it's half or all of them, it's still going to it's still Trump trying to cement a narrative that says nothing bad ever happened. These are my people who support me. They were unfairly persecuted. They were patriots. They were hostages. All this language that he's used to try to memory hold this terrible historic event in American history, to whitewash it, to lie about it, and to make the narrative about how he is, the greatest president in history and his supporters were there to support him. And that's that.
Yeah. J.D. Vance is out speaking. It's unclear whether he's in the loop or not on any of these decisions. So it's not a transparent operation for sure.
I think it's also worth thinking about the broader picture here, too. I mean, the notion of pardoning the January 6th offenders, these convicts, and we're talking about hundreds of people who either assaulted police officers or impeded law enforcement in their job protecting the Capitol that day and protecting members of Congress, to, a broader swath of people who were there picketing, rioting, unlawfully present, carrying firearms, which is another thing they've lied about consistently, Trump and his allies. It's something that I've reported on for years. There were a lot of firearms brought to the Capitol. That's one component of this, but it fits, as I wrote in my recent piece for Mother Jones, this is part of a broad effort that Trump has undertaken over the years to really rewrite the history of his loss in 2020 to Joe Biden and what happened afterward, namely at the Capitol with the insurrection. He wants to erase that. He wants to rewrite it, cover it up. And he's gone at this a whole bunch of different ways. I mean, he has targeted the press over it. He's targeted the House Select Committee that investigated him, calling for Liz Cheney and Benny Thompson, the leaders of that investigation, to be jailed. He's been talking about this just as recently as a couple weeks ago on television, that they should be prosecuted for their investigation of January 6th and of him.
Stop there for a minute, Mark. Because I don't think that we can acknowledge that he's talking about prosecuting members of Congress for doing their jobs because he doesn't like what they're doing without putting the context around it to say that is what Stalin did. That's what Putin does. That's what the worst dictators in the world do. And it is absolutely foreign in the United States. It's not part of who we are. And everyone should be jealous of our freedom enough to call it out, not just to repeat it. Now, I know you're not repeating it, but I hear a lot of people say, oh, Donald Trump said this, without stopping to say, and that thing that he said is appalling and un-American and dangerous and a violation of his oath of office, and it must be opposed. I don't think there's a middle ground.
I think that's a fair way to frame it. Absolutely. And maybe most concerning, most chilling of all is how we've watched one of the two major political parties in our system succumb to this, to join it, to go along with it. You won't find any members of the Republican Party in Congress anymore who are willing to take a stand against this attack on our system. They're all going along with his lies about what, how the Justice Department operated and, supposedly targeted Trump unfairly and we're out to get him and, we're corrupt and we're doing it because Joe Biden told them to. None of that is true. There's no evidence to show any of that to be true. And in fact, if you followed the investigations, the court filings, and the comments made publicly by the leaders in the Justice Department, you can see a very slow, careful, methodical system of investigation and prosecution, the way that it's supposed to work in our system to handle, investigate, and prosecute what are very serious crimes. Trump was successful at getting all of that stopped in the court system. And he's been very successful, I think, as you were alluding to at the beginning of our discussion, in using the media system, using social media, using his bully pulpit as a prominent figure to take the truth out of play, to persuade people with lies.
Can't let it happen. I worry about the truth in a different sort of way, in this way and in other ways. I don't mean to say not this way. What did you think this week when you heard that House Speaker Johnson, at Trump's urging, ousted the conservative Republican chairman of the Intelligence Committee?
I think it's very concerning. I followed that with keen interest because, the intelligence committees are some of the most serious work that Congress does, right, in terms of oversight, in terms of knowledge of some of the most sensitive information that our government handles with respect to national security and foreign policy. And so to turn that committee into more of a partisan tool for the Trump White House is very concerning, especially given what we know was done along those lines in his first term, to try to weaponize national security issues to his own benefit for electoral purposes, as he did with Ukraine, perhaps with his own financial interests. And so to remove someone who was well respected and had been in that post for a long time and was known for being somewhat bipartisan, which, dare we say that's still possible in American politics, to remove that for someone, replace that with someone who's going to just do Trump's bidding or who is more aligned with what Trump wants is I think, deeply concerning.
Yeah, and it goes to America's interest in the rest of the world, because we also learned this week, first, in all of American history, presidential inaugurations are about us. There's never been a foreign leader ever attended American inauguration. But we now know that the co-leader of the Alternative for Germany party, which is the German neo-Nazi party, will be attending Trump's inauguration. At the invitation of, I think only Trump can issue those invitations, even though it came out of the mouth of Elon Musk. So we're going to have the first foreign leader ever. He's a fascist leader in Europe. At the same time, we know Trump has this relationship with Putin. He's talking about invading, for gosh sakes, American allies, and he's bullying Canada, and he's, talking about military action in Latin America. And while all that stuff is going on, he's turning the intelligence apparatus of the government into a partisan tool rather than a tool of the government. He's kicking these people out. It all goes together, and we should call it out.
Yeah, and I think when you think through all of the things that you just described, we've lived through all of this before. We've seen this before. This is what Trump did in his first 4 years as a president, and so in that respect, I think that there is a certain advantage because it's not new and disorienting in the way that it once was. And so, yes, I would agree that, certainly the role of journalism and investigative reporting is to continue to relentlessly scrutinize all of that, shine a light on it, and bring it to the public and let the public understand what's really going on. Because there are many reasons to be concerned about these behaviors and these moves that Trump makes. I mean, this is what he does. And he's emboldened now because he's been elected again after everything that's happened. And how he did that and why that happened is something that historians will parse and debate for decades to come. Yeah, but meanwhile, we're about to live with it. And so what does that mean? And I think, as I said earlier, I think it's to some degree, it's take it as it comes. We'll see how things go. Sometimes I think there is a tendency to ascribe too much kind of, evil genius to Donald Trump. He is not someone who is going to, put gold fountains on every corner in America and usher in the golden age of everything, as he's promising. We know that. So what's the reality going to be like, and how can we report on that and illuminate it as journalists? I think that's the mission now.
Yep, it is mission. All right. Well, one thing you guys have reported, and I'll talk to you a little bit. You and I talked about guns, sensible guns, all that sensible gun laws last time. And since then, I've read the piece in Mother Jones by Will Van Zandt on the secret plans to strike down U.S. gun laws. And what I found fascinating, and I don't think we've talked about it nearly enough in our era, there's all this dark money in politics. But it turns out, and this was in that article, and I'd love you to talk about it a little bit, there's dark money in litigation now, too. And I thought that was really interesting, that you have plaintiffs who don't know who's funding their lawyers.
Yeah, it is interesting, right? And I don't think it's particularly new either, but we're starting to, I think, understand a little bit more how it's been used in recent years. And with the issue of gun regulations, money that's been been put behind these efforts to bring cases up through the judicial system all the way to the Supreme Court, which is now much more favorably positioned for, far-right gun politics than it was even 5-10 years ago. That's a significant effort, and it matters in terms of what will happen going forward with those fights over case law and precedent, and what kinds of regulations we're going to have or not have as a country for firearms.
Yeah, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but with the potential of pardoning militia members so that they can continue their love fest with the president, while at the same time legalizing all of their favorite arms through judicial fiat, is also frightening to me.
Yeah, I think, there were a lot of concerns over the sort of nexus of looser gun regulations and the sort of rise of the politics of grievance and far-right, kind of militia movement politics, and those things all becoming a little bit more mainstream. There were a lot of concerns with that around the voting process with these last couple of elections. Fortunately, we have not seen it materialize in some of the, worst ways that I think people imagined it could. But it
That's
is
because we
something.
lost.
Well, I mean more in terms of what potential political violence might have occurred. But really, the moment we're going to see on Monday with this inauguration, now they've just announced that it's going to be inside the Capitol because of the frigid weather that's coming to Washington, D.C. I mean, think about just the symbolism of that for a minute. In the very Capitol Rotunda where his supporters violently broke in 4 years ago to, stop Joe Biden from becoming president because Trump told them to do it. He's now going to be inaugurated in that same space where, you had members, militia folks there who were in tactical gear and camouflage, and some of them were armed. They were breaking things and taking things, and windows were broken. And in that very space, we're going to see Trump inaugurated again. I mean, it's really just remarkable, and I think very, very sobering to think about. And yep. I guess my hope on a personal level as just an American citizen is that people don't forget what happened there 4 years ago because of Donald Trump.
Well, we have to say it, right? We have to say it and say it and say it. And he will be surrounded by people whose technology, after all, was where this insurrection was organized. It was organized on Facebook. And Mark Zuckerberg will be there having said, you know what, I've decided that now that Donald Trump's president, truth does not matter on my platform. He'll be surrounded by Elon Musk, who has turned Twitter into a sewer of lies, all of which, where he tweaks the algorithm for political purposes. So all of this is enormously unprecedented, dangerous stuff. And the symbolism, as you rightly say, of doing it, of triumphing where they failed to take the place by force 4 years ago, is something that's hard to reckon with, but something that we have to call by its true name, which is that they have this is their triumph, and poses an enormously threatening moment to all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's also worth noting to your comment about the platforms, just as a measure of how far we've come or how far this has gone. It was after the January 6th insurrection 4 years ago that both Facebook and Twitter, not owned by Musk at the time, but those two platforms shut down Trump because of how he was using it to incite political violence. And so, think about where we are now. You've got, not only is he back on those platforms, he has his own platform too, and he's got the technology titans at his side for his inauguration.
Yeah,
pretty extraordinary.
Yep, it's extraordinary. Well, I am comforted that independent journalism still exists. I'm unsure how it will get in the hands of the many, 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 many millions of American voters who prefer to vote without doing the homework that needs to be done. It's a really important question when the propaganda tools are owned by one side. And again, you mentioned earlier the Republican Party is been captured by this movement. They have supported all the things that Donald Trump has said. They haven't yet supported all the things that he says he's going to do. But we will find out if they put all of these terribly incompetent people, not just incompetent, but unfit for the job that they're meant to do, to run the agencies of our government. Really interesting few weeks we're going to have.
Yeah, and I will say this in terms of the media equation and what we do. We probably don't have time to get into it today, but what Mother Jones, Center for Investigative Reporting, and others are going to do ahead is double down. I mean, we have a lot of efforts underway now to broaden our audience, to get our reporting in the hands of as many people as possible, and the information landscape, the ecosystem is really under strain and has been for years in terms of the media business, in terms of how people get and consume information. There's an enormous problem with disinformation that's just continued to grow and grow. But that's also created opportunity for change too. And that's certainly, I think, how we're looking at it and how we not only do the work that we do with our reporting, but also how we get it to people, how we distribute it, what platforms we use. There's a lot. I can assure you there's a lot of thought and energy going into that now, and it's not just us. We know other organizations doing it too. We're talking to each other. There's a lot of thought going into legal protection and defense. So it's kind of like what you said before. Bring it on. We're ready and we're marching forward into it too.
I'm happy to hear that, and I promise I will do my share, have you back to talk about your reporting time and again, because it's so important. Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to talking to you in the new administration.
Thanks, and likewise. It's always good to talk with you.
Take care. Bye.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
You all know Jill Wine-Banks, MSNBC legal analyst, author, podcaster, lifelong fighter, not just for our individual rights, but our collective rights as citizens in a democracy to a good and representative and responsible government that follows the rule of law. Jill, welcome back.
Thank you for having me back, Edwin.
So, I called you like 1 nanosecond after Joe Biden said the Equal Rights Amendment was actually part of the Constitution. I may have jumped the gun a little bit. So let's talk about that briefly or longer if it needs it. And then I want to talk to you about, the rule of law with these guys coming in.
Well, the Equal Rights Amendment is something that I have been fighting for since I was a youngster, basically. I was out of law school, and I was out of the government so that I was no longer under Hatch Act. it's been almost 50 years, and I'm really excited about what happened. The recognition that President Biden gave to the amendment is, I believe, legally correct. Under the Constitution, you amend the Constitution when you have a amendment proposed by both houses of Congress and passed by a 2/3 vote, and then by 3/4 of the states, it is ratified. This amendment was passed, and it was ratified by the final 38th state in January of 2020. So that's now almost 5 years ago. The terms of the amendment said that it would become effective upon ratification 2 years thereafter. So that was 3 years ago. And it is time for the implementation. All that it takes is recognition that it's met all the requirements. The impediments to that recognition have been that originally Congress set a timeline. That timeline was in a preamble. It was not in what the states voted on. So it should have no legal effect or consequences. And I think it was a mistake for supporters of the amendment to try to get a joint resolution extending it, because that means that it must have been effective at some point. And I honestly, really, truly believe that it never was effective and that it didn't need extending. I understand politically why it would have been helpful to have a joint resolution extending the deadline. I also recognize the political reality that that is not going to happen. It would have been impossible to do. The other argument is that the Office of Legal Counsel has an opinion that says that you need the timeline removed. And it seems to me that someone should be looking at it again. Someone from President Biden's team should look at it, because there's a lot of legal experts who have written why that amendment, that Office of Legal Counsel memo is wrong. And I hope that as a final act that President Biden will withdraw the old OLC memo and replace it with one that coordinates with the opinion of many, many legal counsel from Lawrence Tribe on down, and that it will be enforced. There's even, by the way, the big deal was whether the archivist has to publish it. And the archivist, before Biden said anything, said she wouldn't. She was relying on the OLC memo. I think what President Biden did was, in effect, eliminate the OLC memo, and that the archivist has no ability not to publish it now. It is a ministerial act. It's not a discretionary act. And the President of the United States has said that it is fully ratified and should go into effect, that it should be the law of the land. I don't think that the archivist should refuse anymore, and if she does, he should fire her. Donald Trump said he was going to fire her, by the way, but that was because of wrong facts. He wants to blame her for what happened in the search at Mar-a-Lago, for the archives notifying law enforcement that documents hadn't been returned. But it wasn't her. She was not in office at the time. It was her predecessor. So he's firing the wrong person.
God, so he's an idiot. But on this issue, so Jill, if I go and Google how many amendments are to the Constitution today, it's going to tell me 27, not 28. And right. But what you're telling me is no, there are 28 now. So now America has a different point of view about not just what the Constitution means, but literally what it says. Where some of us are going to say, yeah, there's a 28th Amendment and it is law, and some aren't. I guess the Supreme Court has no role in determining whether it's in there or not, but I assume that somebody is going to sue saying their rights were violated and cite the 28th Amendment, and the courts are going to have to figure out how to deal with that.
Right. And, if we can get political, the people who are arguing against it, in the early era was, we don't want unisex bathrooms, which of course we now have, and nobody's upset about it. We don't want women to be drafted. Well, we don't have a draft, and women are fully integrated into the military and doing very well. Although, if we talk about confirmation hearings, the new set def might prove to be a problem. The argument now is that it will justify abortion, that it will legalize abortion. And honestly, I'm not sure that the 28th Amendment will have any impact on whether courts uphold abortions or not. I don't see that this is a discrimination based on sex. Yes, it's true, only one sex can have babies. And let's not get into the woke language of whether trans men can have babies because they are biologically female. Yes, of course they can. And so any person who can have a child could have an abortion if there was some legal protection. But I don't see how this is a sex-based discrimination. It is a physical-based discrimination. And so maybe. But the argument against it on the basis of abortion is not one that I think should hold much weight.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating. The idea that America today doesn't know how many amendments we have in our Constitution and what because of this is stunning. It's just we enter this era with so much up in the air. I wish Joe had ordered the archivist to publish it, like on day one, not as he was walking out the door, so that we would have had time to figure this out while there was time to think.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I wish it had been done earlier. I don't think he needs to instruct her to do it because publication is not required to make it effective. It isn't. Of course, you're right. If you look at Google, it would help to have it published so that it would be included, but it's not necessary. It is not legally required that the archivist do anything.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing when the curricula of law schools, in their common law classes, says there's a 28th Amendment. Here's what it says. Yeah, because
I'm waiting for someone to sue in court under that amendment. And
me too.
Vindicate their rights. Women have, 100 years ago, we got the 19th Amendment, which gave us the right to vote. That is the only time in the Constitution that women have any rights. And I'm a full person who needs rights to get credit, to get loans. I need my rights to do everything that any man can do, to serve on juries.
That's exactly right.
All of those things are essential, and we need this amendment because otherwise we are not protected.
That is correct. Absolutely correct. All right. Well, Joe, it'll be interesting to watch. I don't have standing to sue on this, otherwise I would. And I think, I would sue law schools to say, why aren't you teaching this in your curriculum?
Right.
There are other places to go to.
Or some woman is going to get fired and say it was on the basis of sex. And will therefore have some rights.
Or not get a raise. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And the reason, let me just say, we need it because I'm very fearful of the upcoming Monday and the 4 years that follow it. And I'm worried about things like Title VII, which gives us a statute that gives women some rights, being abolished by the Trump administration. They are not woman-friendly. If that's abolished, that's it. There's nothing. If there's a constitutional amendment, they can't get rid of it. And they'll have to allow women to have certain rights. So that's why we need it. There are a lot of things that people might, we have the EEOC and we have Title VII. That's not enough. Those things can go away. And the Constitution doesn't go away.
I think you've talked about this too. In our lifetimes, right, women couldn't get credit cards. They couldn't rent an apartment. They couldn't do anything without the man saying, and that's just appalling. And the only thing that changed in that are statutes that can be repealed. So
exactly,
you're absolutely right. We need it built into the structure of the country.
It's important. It really, really is important. And I don't trust this incoming administration or any of its cabinet nominees to protect the rights of any of women, who are a majority, and of any minority.
So let's talk about Pam Bondi. So Donald Trump initially appointed this terrible man
Matt Gaetz,
who the country said, you got to be kidding me. And even Congress threw up all over that one because they know him. And so Trump was defeated on that. But he didn't learn any lessons. So he picked Pam Bondi. Is Pam Bondi going to put the rule of law ahead of the abuse? Is she going to be our lawyer, the country's lawyer, and when the Constitution behind her, or is she going to be Trump's fixer sitting in the Justice Department?
The latter. Let me say, I listened to many of the confirmation hearings, but I listened to all of Pam Bondi's and all of Pete Hegseth because I was General Counsel of the Army and I care greatly about the Pentagon. So let's talk about both of them if we can, but I'll answer your question on Bondi. Bondi, first of all, Matt Gaetz may have been nominated so that attention would be focused on him and Congress would get rid of him. And he was forced to withdraw because it was clear he wasn't going to get confirmed. And then, okay, we did one. We don't have to do any more. That, if I'm cynical, that's how I feel about it, that it was a deliberate ploy to make the others seem acceptable. Yep. Exactly. So now, he had no qualifications for this job. His practice of law was minuscule, never involved court. I mean, he was completely unqualified. Pam Bondi's
his practice of
resume
crime was
on
bigger
paper,
than his practice of law. Yeah.
Yes, it was. That's a good one. Pam Bondi, if you look at her resume, was a state prosecutor at a county level for, I think, 18 years, and then 8 years as the attorney general of the state, an elected attorney general for 2 terms. She has supervised lawyers, although a small number, but more than most attorney generals. And so she is qualified. She has a lot of trial experience.
Absolutely right.
And so on paper, she's qualified. I just wrote an op-ed, an opinion piece for U.S. News and World Report, which I hope all of your listeners will look up online. And I said she is not qualified to be the Attorney General for several reasons. One is because she does appear, and from her hearings it was obvious, that she would be a yes man for Donald Trump. 2, because she displayed the most inappropriate temperament to be the Attorney General. There will certainly be no bipartisan working with Democrats in her administration. She spoke over particularly Senators Padilla and Schiff and Hirano. She was snide and sarcastic. She said to Hirano, "You're the only one who wouldn't even meet with me," and then Hirano said, "That's because I wanted your answers under oath," which is a pretty good comeback, but we shouldn't be at that level. She spoke over Schiff, and then he was asking her a non-hypothetical question, which was, sitting here today, do you have any facts that you can point to that would justify, I don't remember what the particular thing was, and she said, well, that's hypothetical. And he said, it's not hypothetical. I'm asking you whether you have any facts today that, it was to go after Jack Smith. And then she said, I would go after you because your state has such high criminal. I mean, what kind of answer is that? What kind of behavior? And she yelled at Senator Padilla, who was asking her about birthright citizenship under the 14th Amendment, which is something that Donald Trump said he wants to eliminate. And she said, I'm not doing your homework for you. Well, she said, I have to study the 14th Amendment. And he said brightly, you're going to be the Attorney General and you're just first going to have to study the 14th Amendment? That doesn't give me much confidence. So it was her behavior of hostility and sarcasm. You know, we have certain rules of behavior, and it's my learned friend in court is what you say. You don't say my opponent. And it just upset me dramatically and made me think this woman cannot be the Attorney General.
Many Americans aren't old enough to remember the real damage a corrupt Attorney General can do to America. And I frankly think Bill Barr was a corrupt Attorney General, but he got away with a lot of it. But you have to think back to an era that you remember really well, John Mitchell, to understand what
who went to jail. Who went to jail? Right, he went to jail. Right.
Yeah.
Richard Kleindienst was indicted. I mean,
yep.
There was a lot of bad stuff going on. Mardian was convicted.
Yep, we're there. I mean, it's very dangerous to the rule of law, not to Democrats or Republicans, but to the foundation of the rule of law and a democracy when you weaponize the justice. And I know that's what they've accused Democrats of doing. I don't think the facts support that accusation, but they are planning it in front of us.
Yes, and there is a very big difference, if I could say, between prosecuting Donald Trump on the evidence that was apparent to everyone who would listen to the facts and looking at the accusations against Biden, against Schiff, against Smith, against Cheney. They have done nothing wrong, and they can't point to anything. They had an investigation of Biden and of Hunter Biden, and they were accusing them of taking foreign bribes. And the person who made the accusation is now in jail for perjury. He made it up. So it's appalling to me that you could have a serious discussion of this, and yet I know that there are many people who still believe the big lie, including Pam Bondi. Let's not forget that she is an election denier. And that was another issue in her confirmation hearing where she was being asked about, do you admit that Donald Trump lost and that Joe Biden won the election? And she said, I will say that Joe Biden is the president.
Yeah.
She would not admit that he won the presidency. She simply wouldn't. She said, I saw things in Pennsylvania. What things? She can't say because there are no things. And because 60 lawsuits were thrown out because they made accusations that couldn't be backed up. Rudy Giuliani, aside from having defamed people and having lost everything financially to the victims of his defamation, has been disbarred because of saying those things in court. She's lucky she only said them under oath. If she had said them in court, she would be disbarred for the election denialism. So that's really bad. But I'll answer any questions about Bondi, but if not, I really would love to say something about Hegseth, who is so completely unqualified.
Too, and I am horrified by what I saw. Yeah,
I mean, aside from the fact that he is a multiple philanderer, which personally that's personal and I don't care. That's up to him. It echoes his boss, the President of the United States, and so you can see why that would be a qualification in Donald Trump's mind. But he ran into the ground 2 not-for-profits that he ran. He has never supervised anything bigger than a few hundred people. And he's going to be given 3 million people and somewhere between $500 and $800 billion in procurements to handle. He can't manage money. He bankrupted organizations. And what is his qualification? he's a weekend anchor on Fox News. That's absurd. He was asked by Tammy Duckworth, our senator, about things he would have to do as Secretary of Defense, including work with ASEAN. He couldn't name a single member country of that organization. He said China and Japan.
I didn't think we handled those questions too well, actually.
Well, what? You didn't think that was a legitimate question to ask him about people you have to negotiate?
I thought that was. Oh, okay. I did. But I think most of the questions were not as useful as they could have been. So what would you have asked? Will you refuse to send troops to fight a war Congress hasn't declared?
Good question.
Right? Donald Trump was talking about deploying the Army to Greenland, for gosh sakes, or to Panama. We don't, this isn't, will you refuse to any order under any circumstances to send the U.S. Army into American cities?
Yeah, and he was asked about shooting people.
And he didn't really answer it either. He could not
refused
say.
to answer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Every difficult answer he said was, well, that's going to be the president's call. And if that's the case, then we know why he's there. Whatever Donald Trump says he should do with the Army, with the most lethal force in the world, he's going to try and order them to do. Thank goodness the members of the military are better trained than that. I think most of them will refuse.
Yeah, I think they will. I was, as General Counsel of the Army, I have a great interest in his remarks about women in the military, and I also was General Counsel of the Panama Canal Corporation. So I also am concerned about what he's saying about the Panama Canal, which we never owned. We had a 100-year lease in exchange for building it, and our lease expired. Yes.
Right. And Carter wisely negotiated a deal early so that we could get some extra rights.
Exactly, including priority rights for our naval ships to go through the canal. Very important and very good. And we would have had no such right if Carter hadn't done that. So that was while I was General Counsel. It's horrendous. Also during the Carter administration is when women were integrated into basic training, were integrated into the military academies. MOSs, which are military occupational specialties or job categories, were opened based on physical ability, so that if you wanted to be a radio operator, you had to show that you could carry a 100-pound radio for a certain number of miles. And many men can't do that, and many women can. So women who could are qualified, men who can't aren't. It used to be only for the regular Army. We eliminated the Women's Army Corps and integrated women into the regular Army. That meant that women could be generals other than the general who headed the Women's Army Corps and the Nursing Corps. You now have many women, including a 4-star, which didn't exist in those days. It's a remarkable achievement. Women have served in combat. How we could say in front of Tammy Duckworth on that committee, who was in combat and lost her legs because of it, it's astounding. And how Joni Ernst, who is a veteran, could support him is astounding to me. I don't know what President Trump has on these people or what influence he has, or I don't get it. He isn't qualified.
Well, and the perniciousness of the lie about women that went this way. Oh, I'm all for women, but we have to have high standards, as if women aren't meeting the standards. They didn't lower the standards for women, and they didn't create a separate set of standards for women. That is a lie. And
thank you for pointing that out.
And I thought Congress, these guys let him off the hook on that. He said, oh, well, they've lowered the standards. They had quotas. Yeah. That mean they have to, and there are no quotas. There's no, you can't find an order on a quota anywhere. And he should have
by the way,
we just should have said, find one. We'll take a break right now. You come back with that order. We don't have to do one more thing. You find it, you lying thug. But that's what they do.
I wish you had said what you were thinking. Yes, there is absolutely physical requirements, and you can't be in a job unless you meet the physical, legitimate requirements. This isn't saying if you're going to be a drone operator, you have to carry 100 pounds, because being a drone operator, you don't. You need certain hand-eye coordination
the requirements
skills.
have to fit the job. Yes,
exactly. And that's what we started doing in the Carter administration, was exactly that. I was also recently on a panel not recently, it was in the Obama administration.
Oh, Jill, this is going to be the last comment, because I was looking up and we are running into the news. So.
Oh, God. It was looking at sexual assault in the military. And one of the panels who testified was 4 generals and 1 admiral, and the lowest ranking was a brigadier, 1 star, and that was the only man on the panel. And so women have moved right up the ranks where they deserve to be, and we don't need that undone by Pete Hegseth.
Well, I don't think he's going to be able to undo it. I think he's going to be just shown to be incompetent, and the military will work around him. It's a complicated institution for sure.
It's true, but you are right that the Democrats did a bad job. They haven't persuaded witnesses to come forward, and that's the problem.
Yep. All right, Jill, thank you so much, as always.
Thank you, Edwin.
Yep.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right, everybody, that was the incomparable Jill Wine-Banks, and I should have had more time. We're going to take a break for the news, and David Pepper's joining me when we come back.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. And I am very happy to be joined by David Pepper, author of Laboratories of Autocracy and Saving Democracy, plus author as well of Some You Really Can't Put It Down fiction. David is an enormous fighter for our democracy and an educator about what that fight requires. Hi, David.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm prepared for what's coming, I think. I think all of this waiting around, listening to their blather about what they're going to do to the country is so unhealthy. I'd rather they were there, we stopped having to pay attention to anything they say, and we can look at what they do and respond.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's been a long couple months. And, the next phase is about to start.
Well, you're ready for it. You've been chronicling sort of this new administration's, what they do and their promises. And I think I love that you've just sort of created a set of baselines. Here's where we are and here's what they promised to do, so we can measure them and hold them accountable for the things that Americans actually want their government to do.
Yeah, it's funny. We're just entering this bizarre world of misinformation and changing the subject and you name it. And so, the thing I started the other day, I just thought, you know what? I'm doing a daily log of everything Trump does, and over time, I really look forward to looking back and kind of keeping it. I've been doing a lot of reading of history, and I just think contemporaneous accounts of things end up being so important down the road. But the second thing you mentioned is Trump made a lot of promises. Some of them were awful on their face. Some of them sounded good on their face. And one of the ones that he credits his win to was he was going to deal with grocery prices, right, and eggs and all that. And so I started the other day. And everyone can and should do this. I went to the grocery store. I took 30 items that we generally buy for my family, and I'm writing down the prices. And every month I'm going to go back and check on it. And because I just worry that in this crazy, Elon Musk and Zuckerberg-dominated world, like if we don't, in our own lives, try and record reality, truth, and facts, we all sort of get caught up in the chaos. So it's one exercise. And I was excited. I mean, I write these little Substacks every day or so. You never know what people are going to read or like or share. And this one actually took off because I think people really want some grounding in, it's a do-it-yourself project to just keep us all sort of sane and honest. And all the hype and the chaos, it's one way to protect against it is this type of thing. So I'm looking forward to going back in a month and seeing where all these prices head. And, we know that if he does the things he's saying he's going to do, I think it'll be one promise that will not be fulfilled. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. I went and reminded myself of the Americans currently being held in Russian jails.
Right.
And there's quite a few. And Mark Fogel, Gordon Black, I want to say their names, Robert Gilman, Ksenia Karolina. These are journalists. Some were, soldiers who are on vacation. These are, the U.S. has said none of them is a spy. They're being held in Russian jails. And Donald Trump has waved his hands. I mean, remember when Evan Gershkovich was released, he said, I could have done it in day one. I'm holding him to this, like free the Americans that your friends are holding captive.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing along those lines is, you see, and people point this out, but Elon Musk, Trump, they're so quick to criticize every government out there. They never bring up Putin, ever. But, Musk is attacking, people in England and people in Canada, but they never bring up Putin. And I think we know why. And so, I don't think he's going to push hard for that. And they don't criticize the dictators, and they criticize the Western democracies. And that tells us everything. I'm glad you're doing that, and we'll keep track of other things too. I do worry. The other reason this stuff's important is we do, I do think we are about to undergo, not to frazzle folks, but I think we are about to undergo a real shock and awe approach. And I tried to write about this in this project I did where I was writing about Project 2025. Tons of executive orders, move as quickly as possible. So the media can't keep up, so we can't keep up. And I do worry that one reason to kind of keep this all, focused, writing this stuff down, sharing it, is because their goal is just to overwhelm. And
absolutely,
I worry
starting
that
in
is
Chicago next week.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the next week.
Yep.
Yeah. And I do think it's Chicago. I think, and I just think that in a way that the media just. I mean, this. I'm having a hard time keeping up with it, but this thing last night. I don't know if you're, and I'm not an expert in this kind of stuff. But this thing where Trump created this coin after himself and it skyrocketed in value, he made all this money. I mean, they're going to do shotgun on one side and then just line their pockets on the other side.
Massive corruption.
So there's a whole dark world out there that I think even the media can't keep up with. So it's I think it's going to be a rough.
David.
Yeah.
The media is going to be compliant. They don't have the manpower. They don't have the skill and the organization to have a massive roundup in Chicago next week. They do have the ability to send, one of those trucks with a speaker on top that says, be afraid, we're going to be here tomorrow, we're going to throw you out.
Right.
And they do have the ability to create a made for the news moment where they go in and they go into one place and they cause a lot of pain. And they're going to hope that the media does them the favor of saying, oh, my God, it's begun. The whole country's in jeopardy, and we all panic. And I'm going to just say the media in advance is going to fall for this. Absolute hook, line, and sinker. These are made for TV things. They can't get to 700,000 people in a week. They don't.
The scale. I've always said the scale of what they're talking about is enormous. They probably can't get to it, and if they try, it's going to be screw ups, huge problems, human rights violations. It's going to be terrible because if you do try it at the scale they're talking about, our entire prison population of the nation is 2 million people, and so if you start talking about a scale, that's the entire country. If you start talking about a scale of deporting what they're saying, I mean, we don't. There isn't anyone. Yeah, there's nowhere near the infrastructure to do it. And if you try, you're going to have literally a human rights crisis right here in rural parts of a lot of our states.
Yep.
But we'll see. I mean, so that's the negative. But and there's a lot of it. I do think, and this is where you and I try and lend us some hope. I mean, I think they're going to overreach a tiny mandate, a historically close margin, and I do think that that will present opportunities to, if we aren't so down, if we aren't so defeated, but we instead are engaging voters, getting good people to run for office. I think the stars could very well align that 26 becomes an opportunity in the year that Trump voters generally don't show up. And when we watch them overreach like they're going to, we need to be ready to fight back. And that's what keeps me going is we at least have to try that because being defeated and scared of it could blow opportunities that present themselves.
I am optimistic again. I read this interesting piece that got a lot of play last week. Norm Eisen, I think, was one of the two writers in it, that said, are we sleepwalking into autocracy? And I just think, no, we were. And autocracy gained a lot of ground all over the country in states like Ohio and at the Supreme Court and in North Carolina and in Wisconsin. But we aren't so much sleepwalking. We're finally waking up and looking around, and you get some of the responsibility for that because you've been warning us. We're finally looking around going, oh, yeah, this is what that is, and we don't like it.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. I think, and one thing I'd say is we have it in our power to, if we don't do anything or don't do enough, to have what we're living through settle in for a long time, or to do an immediate pushback so it doesn't settle in. And that's why people say, I was just before this, I was teaching a class or visiting a class on Zoom with a professor in Washington. And they said, how long is this going to last? So I said, it completely depends. If we are lulled into sort of defeatism or we let this get normalized, then the crazy world we're seeing of billionaires being cabinet members and corruption and just, racism right there, that could become the new normal. And if we let it do that, it lasts for a long time. And that's our history. Or we fight back so quickly because they overreach that we cut it off at the pass earlier. That's all on us. And I think if enough people see the threat of what's happening, they see that it could settle in long term if we're not careful, hopefully, just like after Trump won in 2016, we get ourselves together so that we all of a sudden have, one or several good cycles in a row, if not longer. At least that's how I view it.
I do too. All right, can I turn for a minute and ask you about your, ignoble and beleaguered state?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, Ohio was making progress, and then, but I just think this first energy scandal, which people listening know, we've talked about it a lot. It's a gift that just never ends. If you want to talk about bad things in your government, you wrote a piece that so stunned me. I think it may have been today. I can't tell you yesterday about the shenanigans around John Husted. So first, you tell everybody who's about to be a new United States Senator and a little bit about him, and then how that could possibly have anything to do with Vivek running for governor?
Yeah. Oh, the whole thing. I mean, it really is house of cards in Ohio. And my worry is this is also going to be the national Trump-like corruption. So it's the biggest bribery scandal in the history of Ohio, where basically they turned over the regulation of utilities like First Energy to the handpicked consultant of First Energy. And First Energy, within weeks of that consultant being told that he would be the regulator, paid him what they later admitted was a bribe of $4 million. Okay, but the key moment of the whole thing was, how did they know that he was going to be picked as the regulator of them in advance and know to pay him $4 million? Well, there was a dinner with the governor and lieutenant governor where clearly it was discussed. And this private dinner among two of the executives of the company and the lieutenant governor and the governor occurred the day before they started paying the guy the bribe. Well, the irony is, and this is what I talked about yesterday, is of the 4 people at this dinner that took place 6 years ago, one, the governor, yesterday named another one, the lieutenant governor, Senator of the United States. He is filling J.D. Vance's seat. And within hours of that major activity, the other 2 people at the same dinner were federally indicted for the largest bribery scandal in the history of our state. They were all at the dinner together. And there's something, the timing is unbelievable. But there's also something, if I'm one of those 2 business guys, I'm like, wait a second. How are we, the rest of our lives, facing federal prison sentences while the other 2 guys who were clearly in on the entire conversation are the politician side, are apparently just not held accountable. And at this point, the guy who was clearly the insider to it all, the lieutenant governor, gets to be a U.S. senator. I mean, it really was, as I wrote in the thing you probably read, I write these political thrillers. I wouldn't have come up with this timing in the novel because it would seem so outrageous. So you have the politicians involved in half of in the government side of the facts rewarded and ascending to power. And on the flip side, the private side, the people's their lives are basically they're over. They're going to be federally indicted criminals for the rest of their lives. It really speaks to how in Ohio you get ahead by doing the dirty stuff. It really is the case. There's in 2020, as part of the first energy scandal, again, the Speaker of the House did go to jail, but he was really up to his ears and turned it into a personal bribe. But the only person who did not get reelected in the 2020 state house elections in Ohio was the whistleblower legislator who blew the whistle on everybody else. He lost his reelection. Even the indicted speaker got reelected after the indictment. So there's just something wrong, and this is happening, I'm afraid, nationally. The culture now in places like Ohio is you get ahead if you do the pay-to-play corruption. You rarely get held accountable. You even get to be a U.S. senator if you're in the middle of all that pay-to-play, and you take a bigger risk to your career politically if you don't go along with it. And actually, as I said, if you're a whistleblower that's tried to stop it. That's the culture of states like Ohio these days. And, who pays the price in the end? Ratepayers, public school students, because this is being done with private schools, on and on. But this is the new MO in politics in states like Ohio is you go along with the dirty stuff and you move and you advance. And if you don't, you're kind of out of politics.
Well, it's the corruption of one-party rule. I mean, it's like the CCP. You can get away with that when voters don't matter, and voters don't matter because, as you know, you've rung this bell for a long time, radical gerrymandering means that they can't be voted out.
Yeah. No, the corruption and the gerrymandering all go together, as does the extremism, because once you have no accountability election day, you can get away with all this stuff. And once you're like close to the line or over the line on being corrupt or extreme, you also know you have to keep gerrymandering, because if you ever were in a fair district, you would lose. So it's kind of it just keeps ratcheting up. The more extreme, the more you need to gerrymander. The more corrupt, the more you need to gerrymander. And so now you have this system where once they lock it all down, the corruption and the extremism follow. But then they have to always keep gerrymandering to sustain the corruption and extremism. Mm-hmm. And that's what states – and by the way, also the thing that always follows from this is lower public outcomes, because the people in this culture of the State House of Ohio are not there to serve public outcomes. They're there to give that utility its bailout paid for by higher rates. They're there to give a private company public school dollars paid for by property taxes or cuts to schools. So the people who pay the price in these broken systems are everyday people who pay taxes and expect good public service. But the outcomes the politicians in these systems are serving are not public outcomes. They're literally private outcomes. They're just using public power to deliver those deliver those goods to the private side. And again, that's why who is all about gerrymandering? The very special interests that benefit from it. They know they need it. And so who puts money into the efforts to keep gerrymandering from happening? To stop anti-gerrymandering reform? The same players who benefit from these broken systems. It really is broken. And, there's a way to fix it. Michigan did. Pennsylvania did, because they had a Supreme Court that struck down bad maps. So there's a way out. Wisconsin did because Supreme Court.
Fight.
So, and
North Carolina's in the middle of it now.
Correct. And we were close. I mean, we had a court that stood up. They ignored that court ruling. We tried to end gerrymandering through a constitutional amendment. They literally wrote the most confusing ballot language imaginable, and it was in a Trump year. But the bottom line is you have to keep fighting this gerrymandering, because getting rid of the gerrymandering is what starts to unlock all the other things we're talking about. It's sort of the key to the whole thing is to have the politicians themselves feel zero accountability.
Yep. All right, one last thing.
That's the opportunity of 26. Trump's not on the ballot.
Yes, it is.
This is the year to get 26. Get people running in these state house districts. I don't care if you're in Iowa, Indiana. We have to keep going, because that's where they beat us after Obama won. Was Karl Rove ran a strategy of going for state houses that we had just won. He went for broke in 2010, and he succeeded.
Yeah,
that's sort of that's how we have to be thinking. We're not going to all of a sudden win every federal election we want, but the beginning and the if there's a backlash because they overreach, it'll show up in the 25 and 26 elections. So that's why we have to get out there, get organized, and start running for these positions. And my hope is, and there are three good people I know well running for the DNC chair. I think all three of them see this. Wickler and Ken Martin and Martin O'Malley, I think all see that the way you fight back is what Howard Dean did it through 50-state strategy, and Karl Rove did it. You got to get to these states, and you got to build from the bottom up.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think these DNC guys do feel that way, and so do every activist in the country now feels that way.
Yes.
We've seen it.
They're hungry.
Just talk for a minute about the upcoming governor's race in your state. I guess I was surprised. I didn't know, sitting here in Illinois, that Vivek Ramaswamy was his path.
Well, I don't think he knew it until about a month ago. There's so much House of Cards. Again, these are people like Vivek. They grew up. You and I was literally just watching a West Wing episode before you called. They all watched House of Cards when they were coming of age, and I think they think that's sort of what politics is. And I think that's what's playing out right now. So what's happened in Ohio, and this is true in other states too, the traditional establishment Republican bench has been wiped out by the MAGA crew. As I wrote this morning, if you had told the establishment Republicans in 2018, who were all in statewide office after 18, that their next two senators would be J.D. Vance and a car salesman named Bernie Moreno, and that the favorite to be the governor was some guy named Vivek Ramaswamy, they would have laughed. And these people have taken over without doing anything in Ohio, nothing politically. They have taken over the major positions. And so, this Vivek Ramaswamy, I think, was basically kicked to the curb by Trump a few months ago. Didn't give him a cabinet appointment, gave him this co-leadership of whatever this Doge thing is. That was clearly a sign that he didn't want him that close to the heart of Trump world.
Actual power, yeah.
Yeah. Then Vivek tweets that thing about how the reason we lose jobs is because, we celebrate, jocks and we watch too much Friends and have too many sleepovers and don't have enough math camps. So that wasn't very good politics. And that blew up. And so he's kind of coming back to Ohio, and he's decided he wants to be governor. And I think the Trump people want him out of Washington. And apparently when they want someone to run for governor, no one else gets to. And John Husted, just to be clear, as much as he's been tied up in all the corruption, he's been working to be governor for 20 years. And because Vivek 2 months ago decided he wants to be governor, John Husted just got pushed out after 20 years trying to be governor. Now he's a senator to clear the way for Vivek Ramaswamy. But this is when I say there's opportunity here. I don't think he's a good governor candidate at all. The guy drove everyone. Remember that primary stage where he had one big debate, and then his poll numbers never rose after that because he was so irritating. I mean, Nikki Haley couldn't hold back. I think he could be a terrible governor candidate for them. And so I'm excited that I think him running for governor, he'll have a lot of money. They all will. But I think especially if there's some backlash again, having a guy who's done nothing in Ohio politics, who made his millions telling everyone he had a cure for Alzheimer's, which was a lie, who is tweeting that all sorts of things that are somewhat bizarre about why Americans aren't getting jobs. I actually think he could end up being like Mehmet Oz or Herschel Walker, a terrible candidate. Yep. And so with a lot of the craziness and the chaos and all their gamesmanship, I actually think there's going to be some opportunity. So that's what I'm sort of building towards. I'm trying to spread that message as much as I can, because I really do think, and I'm sure your listeners agree with this, people are very down. They're very traumatized. There's about to be more of it. And I don't overlook all that problem, but I do think when I see someone like Vivek Ramaswamy saying he's going to be governor of Ohio, I do think there's going to be opportunity as well if we have the energy to push through.
I am so glad that this is, sort of the end of our conversation. You ended there, because after this, I'm taking calls from people who've been listening, and they are down. So it's helpful to hear, these other guys are going to overreach. We aren't helpless. We have opportunities. And, as dispiriting as it is to see this man and this crowd in power, there's still limits on that power, and we have opportunities.
And it matters what we do. If we do nothing, that it can settle in for years. And younger generations like my kids will never know there could be something better if we kind of let this become the new dominant form of politics. But if we fight back in the right way and say it's about public service and bring inspirational figures forward, we don't kind of guarantee a loss of what we've all lived for decades, and we fight back quickly. And that's why really staying involved, it really matters that we do that right now.
I'm so happy you're in this fight, David. I so am happy you're in this fight. All right, my friend, we will talk soon.
Thank you as well. Take care.
Thank you for joining me. Yeah. Bye. Bye-bye. All right, everybody, we're going to take a brief break and then call in 773-763-9278. I want to hear from you.
Edwin Eisendrath is taking your calls now at 773-763-9278. The Big Picture is on now. WCPT 820.
All right, Brian, kick us off.
Good afternoon, Edwin. How are you?
Thank you. Good.
Good. I'm calling Joe Biden. I hear signed something that put the Equal Rights Amendment on the table. I don't know if that means it passed. Equal Rights Amendment, simply put, means that the federal government or no state government can discriminate against any person on the basis of sex. And it's been like 100 years trying to get it passed. Do you know, does this mean that it will pass, or what are your thoughts on that? And then I have another point.
Okay, very briefly, what happened was he said it had passed. It has passed. There's some controversy about whether it was ratified by enough states in a time window that was specified in something that went with the original passage of the bill in Congress. But there's also a body of law that says, that time limit wasn't part of the actual thing that went to the states, so it's been ratified and it is in the Constitution. And so I'm afraid, Brian, that for the first time in our history, some Americans are going to say it's in the Constitution, as Joe Biden does, and some are going to say it's not in the Constitution. And like other things in this weird moment we live in, it's a matter of dispute. Because he's not saying it will pass. He said it did pass, and it passed and was ratified, and now is part of the Constitution. So I expect litigation in the next few years, not about whether it's in the Constitution, but about, hey, my rights under this weren't protected. So we'll see. We'll see if law schools start to teach it as if it's in the Constitution. Interesting,
so it certainly should be in the Constitution.
I agree with you. All right, you had a second point.
The second point was you had a guest from ProPublica, and I remember about, 2.5 years ago or so, ProPublica issued a report. I think they said something like 25 billionaires don't pay any taxes at all. I don't know if that's the exact number, but I don't see this business of giving these oligarchs more tax breaks. They own 9/10 of the pie, like they want the whole pie.
Yeah, they do. Yes, they do. I don't think that's, unfortunately, a debate. Greed is an amazing thing. $50 trillion worth of wealth has gone from the 90% to the top, since basically 1980. That's a huge siphoning of the wealth of the whole nation to give to a few people, and it has not resulted in a better life for that 90% down at the bottom. And most Americans know it, but we seem to have been some disagreement over what to do about it. When asked, the new incoming administration said tax cuts for the wealthy were the single most important thing in the world, and then asked if, the $9 minimum wage should be lifted, and he said, oh, no, that would be terrible. So now you know where they are.
Yes. Well, I thank you so much for taking my call, Edwin.
Of course.
Your show is
thank you for being part of it.
And utterly amazing.
Yeah. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Jim, you're next.
Hi, Edwin. I was just thinking about how ambitious this Project 2025 is in Leonard Leo taking over the Supreme Court. And when you think about it, real quick, the history of the 20th century, you got the Bolsheviks lasted for, about 70 years. The fascists in Germany, about 12. Mussolini lasted 25. Franco lasted for about 4 years in Spain. But they all revert back to the democratic government, which I think is the only one that makes any sense to me, anyway. But when I think of these billionaires and trillionaires and so on and so forth, I think of the line from Shakespeare: "We all owe a debt to death." We all know that. We owe a debt to death. Whenever we pay it, we pay it. But to use your money to implement some strange government on the United States, of all places, where they benefited from our form of government and our roads and airplanes and everything else, and then to try to wrest it from the people is criminal in my mind, really criminal. But we know that. But anyway, but Monday's going to be a brutal day. At least it's in the morning, Edwin. You know what I mean? So when I wake up, I'm not sure I don't get up till about 11 o'clock that night. Take an extra sleeping pill because I can't even look at the news. I can't even look at it. They've got Trump out as the alpha and the omega. Whatever he says now is everybody's got a shake in their boots, and everybody thinks it over like he's got an iota of sense, and we all know he doesn't, and he's a criminal, but the criminality is amazing, Did Garland step down tonight or something? I heard over the news.
Garland may have happened while I was on the show. I didn't.
That's right. Yeah, I think something like that. I think he tapped out. But anyway, Edwin, we're in for a heck of a ride. But thank God for your show, and thank God for this radio station. And you have a good week. And thank you, buddy.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate your being part of all of this. Al, you're next.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm actually with you right now, and I have a lot of optimism because there are so many more of us out there than there are of them. And somehow we just all have to come together and speak in one voice. I was actually found a group through the individual mobilize, and I was just there this morning at the Oak Park Library, and all people that are interested in moving forward and so on. And I've been in several Zoom calls, like I found one, the Northwest Chicago Indivisible Group, and they do a daily Zoom call during the week in the morning, all looking at what we have to do and how to be positive. And then, I've connected with the Unity Temple and in Oak Park as well, and they are the same, trying to do things to move forward, and we just have to figure out how to get everybody together and speak in one voice and get around the media. I was making a statement saying we need to figure out how to cut off the head of the snake, which is the media, and I like that analogy. And then somebody answered back on Facebook that this is the Asian year of the serpent, and that makes it more interesting. We have a little what do you call it? Two sides, good and bad, there to play off of. It's just getting the message out.
I think we need the media. I know a lot of it is nonsense, and it's. But there are good journalists out there, and we are going to need them. We're going to need them to dig, and dig. But we also know that they get used, and they love spectacle. And God knows Donald Trump delivers spectacle, and we shouldn't be fooled, and we shouldn't be fearsome, fearful. We should instead focus on what we love and what we care about, and each other, and push forward. Anyway, Al, thank you very much for your call.
Okay, we'll talk to you later.
You bet. Okay, I think Nancy, you're next.
Hi, Edwin. How are you?
Hello there.
Okay, what I'm about to say, you're going to completely disagree with me, and I'll
the
probably
joys of radio.
Yeah. Well, I could actually talk for the entire 3 hours, but we know that's not going to happen. Anyways, thankfully, the show you had today, every single one of your guests proved my points I've been making for the last 50 years that I've been voting, and still nothing has changed because the Democrats still don't know how to fight back, and they go after the wrong thing. They don't answer the right question, ask the right questions, and they certainly don't go by. If I was in a playground right now and I only had two choices, which is the first problem, that's all we have is two choices, and I had to choose just going by how they fight and the results they get, if I had to choose the cons to be on my baseball team or softball team or the Dems, I would choose the cons every single time. The Dems still know how to screw up a one-car funeral. And they are not getting I can't believe if I live another 75 years, I will not buy that this election went by without a hitch. And, we lost every single branch of the government. And you're right about people don't know what's going on in their government. And that's because of the cons, too. And that's because the Dems allow them to get away with everything. We don't have enforcement of laws. We don't have accountability. They should have never lost to this felon in the first place in 2016. It should have been a sweet ride into the White House with him running against them. But because of the cons, who, by the way, are not afraid of him, they're all part of it. And it's been going on for a long time. It hasn't been just since the felon showed up. It's been going on since Kennedy. No true story and no true results on how who assassinated him, and it's been downhill ever since. Nixon never got prosecuted, should have been, and ask Jill Wine-Banks about that. And he broke the law to get into office, so did Ronnie Reagan, and let's not even talk about W being a war criminal, and Cheney, and it goes on from there. And we keep getting, what happens? We keep getting the same results. They lose, not us, the Democrats in this country, not us, you period, S period, but the Democratic Party still gives in to them all the time. And that's the reason. You can't tell me, I don't care how much we argue, you can't tell me that all the momentum and everything that Harris Walz had, when all this happened, and how they eat each other because they right away go down on all the other Democrats instead of, standing up for them and fighting back. No, instead they're like, oh, Joe Biden, no, this and that, no, the other. All they do is listen to the cons and they buy into all their BS, and that's the reason they always lose. And in turn,
well, okay, Nancy, there's a lot there, and there's a lot there I agree with. But your analogy of the baseball game is interesting. It is I believe, the corruption of the Supreme Court over the years that says, and we're, you know what, in inning one, we both get on the ballpark and we play a baseball game. By inning three, they've changed the rules so they get 4 outs an inning and we only get 3. So it's not like we can't win in a fair game. That goes to gerrymandering, that goes to voting rights. We will win a fair game. But we have to hold John Roberts accountable, and we have to fix these things. And we don't have the power to fix it yet. We need to get that power.
But how did we get here? Because they didn't fight for us in the first place.
That isn't just the Dems' fault. That's voters' fault, who didn't think the court was important.
No, and that's another thing. The Dems turn around after they lose. They turn around and they blame the voters. You know what? Why didn't all the voters get out there and cast their vote? Don't get me started on how the voting in every other country is, because every vote doesn't count in this country. They set us up. They give us who to vote for in the primary. I could explain that one by just looking back on the last few primaries. They forced Hillary Clinton on us. They ignored Joe Biden, which is when he should have been in there, and we would have had him for 2 good terms, and we would have never had the felon in there. And, and then they did it to Joe Biden again when he finally did get chosen. They did it to Bernie because they ignore him. If we had enough progressives, which we don't yet, and I don't think we're going to have time to, I think time is already running out, and we're already witnessing the downfall of our country. We don't have democracy in this country. I wish they'd quit saying that. Quit asking me to save something that we don't have. I can't save democracy, fight to save democracy, when we don't have democracy in this country, and we don't.
Okay, Nancy, I'm going to go on to other folks, but I appreciate that point of view, and I don't disagree with a lot of it. I agree with more of it than you think. I do think parts of the democracy have been eroded, and I wrote a very long Substack piece for anybody who wants to take the time today and published it about how our democracy has been deeply eroded over the years and that we are now paying attention to it. I fault John Roberts, but you can see that. Anyway, thank you, Nancy. Really appreciate it. I think we're going to go to the West Coast to David.
Oh, yeah. Howdy, Edwin. Yeah, I can't fully agree with that last caller. Ever since the media takeover by Rupert Murdoch and the deregulation of the media by the FCC, those old boys have been able to spin lies and spin lies and spin lies. And there are many writings on how the internet doesn't have to tell the truth. Now what's his name? Zuckerberg is not even going to do any fact checking. I started in radio 53 years ago, and I had an FCC license. And when I signed on, I swore that I wouldn't give it bad information to the listener. I wouldn't send them in the wrong direction. Just like, War of the Worlds, the idea of playing, some sort of a broadcast that would scare the public into going off a cliff. We swore that we wouldn't lie. And when
the Supreme Court changed the rules, as you know. They said the First Amendment in the United States means that the fairness doctrine is illegal, because that means you're forcing people to present both sides or to say things they may not believe, and people are free to say whatever they want, and the truth will find its way. So the Supreme Court got rid of all those constraints that you're talking about.
Right, which is like the antivirus of society. Telling the truth is a major part of being able to have a healthy society. And when it comes down to people like Rush Limbaugh, those guys didn't have an FCC license. They called themselves entertainers. And so they were able to basically con the public by pretending to be selling some kind of truth, when in fact, if you ask them point blank, they would answer, "I'm an entertainer. I don't have a responsibility to the public." And so that was their scam, and they've been pulling it, and they've been able to get tax write-offs for telling lies because they call themselves entertainers. And in the old days, the news department was mandated to be a nonprofit. And that's a major part of journalism, that you cannot sell yourself to one side or another. If you're going to be an honest journalist, you've got to be able to present both sides. And when those old boys then demanded that the news departments across America be able to they had to have a profit. They had to be able to pay for themselves. That's where the boss man came in and buying the news department. But the solution that I was going to give is, I've lived through Ford. I lived through Reagan. I lived through the first Bush. I lived through the second Bush. And all of those scandals, the only way we were able to survive was to come up with our own money, to come up with our own barter systems, our own interactions. And in fact, this goes back to Washington at Valley Forge. The reason why Washington was freezing at Valley Forge was because there were so many counterfeit. The revolutionary money was the Continental dollar, and the British had started counterfeiting the Continental dollar. Now, Donald Trump is going to be doing the same thing now. I don't know if you know it, but he wants to take American gold and buy Bitcoin with it. And he wants to basically...
I'm going to interrupt you only because I got only a few minutes left in my show, and I don't have enough time for the economics, which is a huge problem.
I can slam through. I'll slam through. The solution for us is to come up with. Ben Franklin and the boys came up with another currency. They called it the New American Tenor. We're going to have to change out the money right in front of Donald Trump.
Say that again?
We have to change out the money right in front of Donald Trump. He wants to have us use Bitcoin for a medium of exchange. We say no. He wants to devalue the American currency. We say no. And we figure out ways to refuse to use the money that he wants us to use. He wants us to use funny money. We're not going to.
I think it's going to be a problem. I mean, the currencies are complicated. The government and the tech companies are in league here. We have to be very, very careful. And the one thing these guys aren't is very careful. Anyway, David, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It's insightful. I'm going to turn to Earl in Hyde Park.
Hey, thank you for taking my call. And I'm going to quickly jump in and jump out. Everybody was talking politics, and I agree with much of what was said, but I'm going to focus on L.A., and I hope that we don't lose too many more lives, we don't find too many more bodies, and I hope that the rebuilding process allows us to build back better and not build back the same old way so we can be faced with the same thing 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. So that's my issue. I just wish all the people out in the affected areas and the fire zones and all the employment that is lost and stuff. I hope that Trump steps up and gives them the support that we need out there because it's a blue state. All right, Edwin?
Hey, thank you, Earl. Really appreciate it. And you know what? Thinking about the victims of that horrific fire in Los Angeles, it's a artifact of climate change, and that is going to be with us. And it's the Trump administration promises only to double down on fossil fuels, so we can expect more of this. We're going to have to mitigate, not stop some of the worst things from happening. We can mitigate, but it's expensive, and we have to be smart. But rebuilding communities, taking care of communities that are destroyed, either from climate change or as where I started, which was Gaza, the southern part of Israel, the northern part of Israel, Lebanon, parts of Syria, and we haven't touched on Sudan, which is worse than all of it, Ukraine. Great places where battles have raged. Some of them have stopped. Where they've stopped, we have to help rebuild. We have to help rebuild smart, compassionately, sustainably, and in ways that promote peace. Where the wars are still going, Donald Trump has promised, he will bring home all of the Americans in Russian jails on day one. That's about, I think, 9 or 10. He's promised to end the fighting in Ukraine on day one. I'm sure he will try and distract from those promises by sending blaring sirens and news cameras on raids in Chicago. He will cause some damage for sure, but let's hold him to his promise. Bring those folks home, create peace in the world, all those things he said he would do on day one, and not get fooled by the stunts. Anyway, everybody, thank you for being here on this last show that I do during the Biden administration. As I said last week and this week, and we'll keep saying, when this new administration arrives, they were going to try and goad us into reacting, take a breath so that we can, instead of react, we can respond more thoughtfully. And fight to protect what we love, fight to protect the institutions we care about, and always, whether we are successful or not in any particular battle, bear witness. As David Pepper's doing, write it down. Let's make a record of what's going on, what we care about, because you know what? This is America. And honestly, guy leads an insurrection, 4 years later, he's sworn in the same place. Fun things happen in this country, fun in the sense of crazy fun. They think they're on top of the world today. You know what? It's going to be somebody else. And in 2 years, we take back the Congress, we hold them accountable. In 4 years, we have a full accounting for the trauma they have caused, and we will fix this problem. Hang in there. Love you. See you next week.